Are you ready to hear an inspirational hero tale about one of our four-legged friends? My name is Kim, and this is Harry Hero Tales. Welcome to Season 2 of Harry Hero Tales, Animals to the Rescue. I'm your host, Kim Hagel. In today's episode, we'll be heading back more than 100 years to tell the story of a hero named Stubby. To tell the story of Stubby, we need to explore a bit of history around what has been described as the Great War or World War I. At the turn of the 20th century, the world was entering a new age and was in an incredible transition into industrialization, advances in science and technology, and in new modes of communication as well as transportation. Think of it as the dawn of radio, cars, basically the Gilded Age had ended and society was in transition. Social changes and the rise of unions brought a strong voice and position of strength to the masses, and this was against extreme wealth and corrupt politics, which had dominated for decades. So during this time, tensions were pretty high. In Europe, new powers were developing while an old one was declining, and this generated sort of a power vacuum that disrupted the balance. Now, these pressures finally exploded into war after the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated by a Bosnian Serb in June of 1914. The Austro-Hungarians held Serbia responsible, and as a result, they declared war on July 28, 1914. Soon, several countries joined supporting each side. For example, Russia joined supporting Serbia. Germany joined, declaring war against Russia and France. And the old power I had mentioned earlier, which at this time was sort of weakening and created that power vacuum, well, they were the Ottomans. And the Ottomans entered the war in support of Germany. It was a full-on European war. Later, in response to Germany bombing ships in the Atlantic that were transporting goods to North America, who at that point wasn't involved, the United States then entered the war on the Allied side in April 1917. So the main allies consisted of Russia, France, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The main central powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. So in the middle of all of this conflict, how did what has been described as the most decorated war dog of the Great War end up in it at all? This all begins on the campus of Yale. That's right, you heard me correctly. Yale. American troops during 1917, in preparation for war, were being trained on several campuses across the United States. The 102nd Infantry were assigned to Yale. While they were on campus training and going through drills, a small dog that seemed to be a stray began hanging around them in July of 1917. One soldier in particular, Corporal James Conroy, took a particular liking to the little dog. He eventually would be named Stubby. He is described in history books as a Boston Terrier mix or sometimes an American Pit Bull Terrier mix. He was brindle in color and relatively small. Stubby spent so much time with the troops, he actually learned a few drills of his own. Now remember, this is when they were on campus training. He was participating in that. They spent a lot of time with him teaching him bugle calls and how to salute by raising his right paw. So he was so attached, Corporal Conroy couldn't leave him behind. So he had to maneuver a very tricky mission, which was to figure out how to get little Stubby onto the ship that was about to take them all the way to France. So Conroy actually found a way to hide him underneath his coat as he boarded. And as luck would have it, Stubby was actually able to board without any detection. But eventually, now luckily this is while they were on their way, he was discovered by Conroy's superior officer. Stubby had a trick or skill up his sleeve. Demonstrating his impeccable training while he was at Yale, Stubby saluted the officer. So impressed, the superior officer allowed Stubby to remain on board. The 102nd fought in many battles in France, including what are known as the awful and never-ending trenches. I don't know if you've ever seen any documentaries. I've seen a few. It looks horrifying. So Stubby was with his fellow soldiers in the midst of all of that. In fact, he entered the front lines on February 5th, 1918, and he was under fire day and night for a month. There's a lot of information out there about the experience and what it was like in those trenches. I'll just sum it up, not to be disrespectful, but because it's unimaginable and I don't know that I'll be able to find enough words, but I'll just put it this way. It was awful. It was uncomfortable. They were exposed. It was full of disease. I mean, they're trapped in these cold, often wet trenches, not a whole lot of shelter, and it ultimately became a location of stalemate and death. And what our troops and many troops around the world, what they endured, and some survived and some did not. It's, like I said, it's unimaginable. Stubby actually became a critical part of the safety of his fellow soldiers while he was serving in these trenches. He was trained and ultimately he was successful at being able to detect gas attacks. And this was an amazing and useful skill for his fellow troops. He became so trusted in this task that his troops refused to enter a trench without Stubby first inspecting it. If he ran out, they refused to enter, period. Stubby also saved troops because of his amazing hearing. He alerted them to enemy fire, which gave them life-saving warnings, enabling them to get out of harm's way from dangerous mustard gas attacks. Stubby was also key in comforting the wounded and keeping them company while they were in those trenches. His presence and showcase of his drill talents kept the troops entertained. Now, in my research, there's one story that certainly did appear in newspapers at the time and is well covered, but some of the articles that I found, they couldn't definitively say if it really happened or not. But I'm going to share it with you because I believe some activity did take place. So here's how the story goes. He found a German spy hiding in the bushes near where his troops were located. Apparently, Stubby sniffed him out, and when the German spy tried to make an escape, Stubby wasn't having it, and he grabbed a hold of the seat of his pants with his teeth and would not let go until American troops came and found them both. Various Central Powers surrendered the spring of 1918, and it was a hard war on everybody, and there were those that said enough, and they were out. Now, towards the end of the war, by that time, Russia had actually gone through its own revolution. Now, this is when the Bolsheviks had taken control and the monarchy was abolished. In fact, the entire royal family was assassinated, murdered. Now, with all that happening, the socialists were involved in the negotiations for various countries to surrender. Germany was the only holdout, but they didn't last very long. They were ultimately defeated in August of 1918. The result was basically a new world map. Quite frankly, when I was growing up and I learned more about World War I, there were countries being mentioned that I had never heard of. And there were forming of countries that hadn't existed before the war. And if you know your history, the result was Germany was severely punished and sanctioned at the end of World War I. And there are many references to this situation having been a factor, certainly a contributor, to the rise of the Nazis less than 20 years later, which ultimately moved everyone into the next World War, which was World War II. Now, in the middle of this awful and deadly war, there was good news when it came to an end. And the good news was Stubby survived. He not only survived, he thrived. Stubby led many parades. He met 3 presidents in his lifetime: Woodrow Wilson, Warren Harding, and Calvin Coolidge. So he was treated like the hero that he was. Stubby also received a gold medal from the Humane Society during one of his visits to the White House. He even attended law school. Conroy took him along with him when he attended law school at Georgetown University in 1921. Some fun facts about Stubby: he served active duty during the Great War for 18 months and participated in 17 battles. He learned bugle calls, as I mentioned earlier, and he responded as he was trained to do. He was named Stubby because of his, quote, stub of a tail. And that's pretty similar to what you see with a Boston Terrier. So when they were trying to figure out what he was, sounds like it leans a little bit more towards Boston Terrier. Now, if you do some research and take a look at some of the photos of Stubby, you'll see an embroidered blanket. This blanket was presented to Stubby by a group of French women as a show of their affection and appreciation, along with buttons and pins, all to showcase what he accomplished during his military service. Stubby died in his sleep March 16th, 1926. He's estimated to have been between 9 and 10 years old at that time. He was so beloved and well known, there was actually an obituary that appeared in the New York Times in April 1926. The title of the article was Stubby of AEF Enters Valhalla. For those that may not know, AEF stands for American Expeditionary Forces. Interestingly, there was a subtitle to that New York Times article. The subtitle, quote, "Tramp Dog of No Pedigree Took Part in the Big Parade in France." What? Okay, he's a hero, and tramp dog, no pedigree? Really? Oof. All right, anyway, subtitle aside, the article, the obituary, it was a fine tribute to a hero of the Great War. Some key references that I've already talked about were included, such as the February 5th, 1918 date that he entered front lines and that he was under fire for over a month. And it really strikes me when I think about that situation years later, reading about the loss of Stubby and what he had accomplished and endured, especially all that time in those horrifying trenches. I still find it incredible that Stubby stayed there, survived that. He must have been so attached, not only to Conroy, but to his fellow soldiers. He must have been committed to his service, and he did not wander off. He did not run away. He stayed with his troops. The article also spent some time talking about the importance of just Stubby's presence. how much he did for his fellow troops when they were wounded, when they were trapped in those trenches, maybe during just despair, and his ability to help his fellow soldiers. And one of the quotes in the news article is very fitting, and I think it's a sign that despite the subtitle, they were absolutely paying tribute. And the quote is, "He seemed to know the greatest service he could render was comfort and cheerfulness." There are several ways you can pay tribute to Stubby. One is at the Veterans Memorial Park in Middletown, Connecticut, where there is a bronze statue depicting Stubby saluting, as he did with pride while serving. The statue, it's called Stubby Salutes, was dedicated by the family and descendants of Conroy in May of 2018. The National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City, Missouri, displays a brick along the Walk of Honor that states, "Sergeant Stubby, hero dog of World War I, a brave stray." Stubby's preserved remains can be found today at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in its Price of Freedom, Americans at War exhibit. I'm sorry I missed seeing Stubby when I was in Washington, D.C. years ago. When I go back, I definitely will stop by to pay my respects. Stubby has been gone for nearly 100 years, but we still remember him and his bravery. Thank you, Stubby, for your service and for being such an amazing hairy hero. While that only touches the surface of this amazing hairy hero, we have to leave it there for this episode. If you know of a great hairy hero tale and would like to hear it on this podcast, email us at hairyherotales@gmail.com. For more information on this program, visit our website, www.hairyherotales.com. That's TAILS.com. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is a Southpaw Productions podcast, edited, produced, and hosted by me, Kim Hagel. Opening and closing music provided by Mary Selvage. You can follow her and find out her show schedule at Selvage613 on Instagram, and check out her complete catalog of music available on Spotify, Apple Music, and more. And remember, there are four-legged heroes all around us. Who knows, you might even adopt one. I've adopted many little heroes from some amazing rescue organizations, and I've featured two on my website: the All-American Dachshund Rescue and the French Bulldog Rescue Network. If you're looking to rescue your next hero or would like to help with transport or financial support, I highly recommend both of these organizations. Neither are affiliated with this program in any way, but they both have my sincere gratitude and support. Thank you to all of the heroes of the world, and a special shout out to hairy heroes everywhere.